Liana Josh had learned to read danger in the tilt of a glass, the pause before a word, the way a man's hand lingered too long on a bar top, but she never saw this coming. Eclipse nightclub pulsed with life on this sultry June evening in Charleston. Bass thumped through the floor, vibrating up through Liana's legs as she moved behind the bar with practiced elegance. She'd perfected this dance over 2 years, mixing drinks, deflecting advances, surviving. Every tip went into the same mental envelope, student loans from a nursing degree she never finished. Tonight felt different. The VIP section had been closed off since 6. Clerk Donovan, her boss, polished and dangerous in his late 30s, had been locked in his back office with his crew all evening. Liana knew better than to ask questions. In places like Eclipse, curiosity didn't just kill cats, it made people disappear. But when the floor manager handed her a tray of premium whiskey and pointed toward Clerk's office, she had no choice. She walked the hallway with her head down, heels clicking against marble. The office door was cracked open, just slightly, and through that crack she heard words that stopped her heart cold. The body won't surface. We own the coroner. Make sure the Koreans' people don't start digging. Liana's breath caught. She froze. Above her head, a security camera rotated with a soft mechanical whir. Welcome to K-Stories by Emma. Before we continue, please like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss any story. Hey besties, it's Emma here. Before the story continues, let me say this quickly. If these stories ever make you pause, if you've ever wished some scenes went deeper, darker, or more honest, I've created a small private space on Telegram just for that. I share short micro stories there, quiet, intense scenes that don't always make it onto YouTube. Telegram members also hear story intros first, see upcoming titles, and help shape future stories by voting on characters and directions. It's calm, it's personal, it's a space for real story lovers. You'll find the link in the description or pinned comment. Now, let's get back to the story. Her hand trembled as she set the whiskey tray down outside the door. Through the crack, she saw 3 men. Clerk sat at his desk, immaculate in a charcoal suit. Beside him stood Voss, his head enforcer, a mountain of muscle with dead eyes. And across from them, a city official she recognized from the news, Councilman Burke. She caught fragments, pieces that made her nursing school brain click into overdrive. Riverside dump site, Korean crew sniffing around. Eliminate the connection before they trace it back. They were talking about a murder, a cover-up, and people who were hunting for answers. Liana memorized it all. Names, locations, the timeline Clerk mentioned. 8 days since the body was moved. Her mind cataloged every detail like she was back in clinicals recording vitals. Then Voss glanced up. His eyes found the monitor mounted on the wall, the hallway security feed, and on that screen, frozen in perfect clarity, was Liana, standing outside the door, listening. Their eyes met through the camera. Terror flooded her system, cold, absolute. She wasn't just a bartender trying to survive anymore. She was a witness, a liability. Voss rose from his seat, his chair scraping against the floor. Clerk's voice cut through the room like a blade. Handle it, quietly. Liana didn't wait. She abandoned the tray and turned, walking quickly back toward the bar. Not running, not yet. Running would confirm guilt. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel eyes burning into her back. She made it halfway across the main floor when her coworker Jensen grabbed her arm. "Girl, what did you do?" he hissed, his voice urgent and low. "Voss just radioed security. They're looking for you." Liana's stomach dropped. She glanced toward the exit. Two security guards stepped into position, blocking the main doors. Their radios crackled. The club's bass pounded in her chest like a countdown. She had maybe 60 seconds before they closed in. Her only option? The VIP section, the one place staff weren't supposed to enter uninvited, the one place that might get her killed faster than Voss would. Liana slipped off her heels and gripped them in one hand. The marble floor was cold beneath her feet, but she barely felt it. Adrenaline had taken over, sharpening every sense, drowning out everything except the single command screaming in her head: move. The strobing lights turned the dance floor into a chaotic maze of bodies and shadows. Perfect. She plunged into the crowd, weaving between dancers who were too lost in the music to notice her. The bass vibrated through her chest, masking the sound of her racing heart. She kept her head down, her braids swinging as she ducked and pivoted. Behind her, she heard shouting. Voss's voice cut through the noise, barking orders. She risked a glance back and saw him, flanked by two enforcers, both scanning the crowd with predatory focus. Their eyes swept over faces, bodies, searching for her. Liana dropped lower, using a group of college kids as cover. Her breath came in short, desperate gasps. She pressed herself against a column, the cool surface grounding her for just a second. That's when she saw it. The velvet rope, the VIP entrance, and for just a moment, one blessed, impossible moment, it was unguarded. This was it. Cross that line and there was no coming back. She'd be breaking every rule Eclipse had. But staying here meant disappearing, just like the body they'd been talking about, the one at the riverside dump site. She made her choice. Liana slipped past the rope and bolted for the staircase. Her feet hit the steps fast, her hand gripping the railing as she climbed. The second level opened up before her, quieter, more intimate. The music was softer here, filtered and distant. Amber lighting bathed everything in warm gold, casting long shadows across private booths that lined the walls. Each booth was separated by sheer curtains that shimmered in the low light. From somewhere below, Voss's voice exploded into the quiet like a gunshot. "Find her, now." Liana's pulse spiked. She moved faster, her eyes darting between the curtains, looking for somewhere, anywhere to hide. Then she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate. She spun around and her stomach dropped. A security guard stood at the top of the stairs, his hand already reaching for his radio, his eyes locked on hers. Panic seized her. Liana stumbled backward, her feet tangling beneath her. She crashed through the curtains of the nearest booth, her arms flailing for balance she couldn't find. She hit something solid. No, someone. Her body landed awkwardly, her weight collapsing across a man's lap. Strong hands caught her waist instantly, steadying her before she could fall further. The grip was firm, controlled, the kind of touch that didn't ask permission. It commanded stillness. A voice cut through her panic, low, accented, laced with something between irritation and cold curiosity. "Don't move." Liana froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, so slowly, she tilted her head up and found herself staring into the face of Calm Ji-ho. His features were sharp, aristocratic, pale skin, dark eyes that held absolutely no warmth, just calculation, assessment, like he was deciding whether she was worth the trouble of acknowledging it all. He didn't push her off. He didn't speak again. He just watched her, waiting. Time stopped. Liana became acutely aware of every single point of contact. His hands on her waist, firm, steady, anchoring her in place, her palms pressed flat against his chest, feeling the expensive fabric of his black suit beneath her trembling fingers, the heat of his body radiating through the layers between them. She couldn't breathe. The booth wasn't empty. 3 other men sat around the low table, all Korean, all dressed in tailored suits that screamed money and power. They stared at her with varying degrees of surprise, one with raised eyebrows, another with a barely concealed smirk, the third stone-faced and unreadable. But Jiho himself was unnervingly still. His expression gave away nothing, no anger, no confusion, just cold, clinical observation. He didn't push her off, didn't demand an explanation. He simply studied her, the wild look in her eyes, the way her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths, the sheer desperation radiating from her like heat. Liana's mind raced. She had seconds, maybe less. Voss was coming. The security guard had seen her. This man, this stranger whose lap she just crashed onto, was her only shot. She made her choice. Leaning closer, her braids falling forward to partially shield her face, she brought her lips to his ear. 3 words, barely a whisper. "Please help me." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying just how terrified she really was. Jiho's jaw tightened. She felt the subtle shift in his posture, the flex of muscle beneath her hands. For a long, agonizing moment, he said nothing. His dark eyes searched hers, dissecting her like a puzzle he was deciding whether to solve. Then, from somewhere outside the booth, Voss's voice rang out. "Check the VIP booths." Liana's fingers curled into Jiho's jacket, gripping the fabric like a lifeline. She was trembling now, her body betraying the calm she was desperately trying to project. Something shifted in Jiho's expression. It was so subtle she almost missed it. A slight narrowing of his eyes, a decision clicking into place behind that unreadable mask. He made his choice too. His hand moved from her waist to the small of her back, the pressure increasing just enough to hold her firmly in place. He turned his head slightly, speaking to his associates in rapid Korean. His tone was calm, authoritative, the kind of voice people obeyed without question. The 3 men exchanged glances. Then, without a word, they stood and filed out of the booth, disappearing through the curtains as silently as shadows. Now it was just the 2 of them. Jiho's eyes never left hers as he spoke, his voice low and deliberate, each word carefully chosen. "You will stay exactly as you are. You chose me for the evening. Do you understand?" Liana nodded, her throat too tight to form words. Outside the curtain, she heard footsteps, heavy, purposeful, getting closer. A shadow fell across the sheer fabric, tall, broad-shouldered, Voss. Jiho's thumb began to trace a slow, deliberate circle against her back. The touch was controlled, almost clinical, but the message was clear. Stay calm, don't move, trust me. Liana held her breath as the shadow paused just beyond the curtain. Voss pulled back the curtain. His eyes landed on Liana immediately, still perched on Jiho's lap, her body angled toward him as though they'd been deep in conversation, intimate, private. Jiho didn't flinch. He turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting Voss's with cold, measured irritation, the kind of look that didn't need volume to carry weight. "This area is private." 3 words, calm, final. Voss hesitated. His eyes narrowed as he took in the scene, Liana's position, Jiho's hand resting casually on her back, the booth now empty except for the 2 of them. He was calculating, weighing his options. Liana forced herself to breathe slowly, in, out. She kept her expression neutral, her posture relaxed, like she belonged exactly where she was, like this was normal. Voss's attention shifted back to her, his jaw tight. Your shift isn't over. Liana opened her mouth, but before she could form a response, Jiho cut in, smooth, effortless. I requested her company personally, bill it to my account. The silence that followed felt like a blade hanging in the air. Voss's hand twitched toward the radio clipped to his belt. His fingers hovered there, uncertainty flickering across his face. He was trying to decide if pushing this was worth the risk. That's when the shadows moved. A broad-shouldered man stepped forward from the corner of the booth, so still before that Liana hadn't even noticed him. His suit was dark, his expression blank, but his presence spoke volumes. Jiho's bodyguard, and he wasn't asking questions. The move was subtle, just a single step, but the message was crystal clear. Voss's expression hardened. His pride wanted to push. His survival instincts told him to walk away. Survival won. Enjoy your evening, Voss said, his tone clipped and cold. He let the curtain fall. The moment his footsteps faded into the noise of the club below, Liana tried to stand. Her muscles were coiled, ready to bolt. Jiho's hand on her back stopped her. Not yet. His voice was quieter now, almost careful. The sharp edge from earlier had softened, just slightly. He'll be watching. Liana's heart was still racing, but she understood. Voss wasn't stupid. If she jumped up the second he left, it would confirm everything. So she stayed, frozen, trapped between terror and the strange, unsettling calm of the man beneath her. Jiho kept her there for another 2 minutes, long enough for Voss to move on, short enough to avoid crossing a line neither of them had agreed to. When he finally released her, his hand lifting from her back, Liana slid off his lap. Her legs were unsteady. She gripped the edge of the table to keep from stumbling. Jiho stood in one smooth motion, adjusting his cufflinks with the kind of precision that suggested he did everything with control. He didn't look at her as he spoke. There's a service exit near the kitchen. My driver will take you wherever you need to go. No hesitation, no questions, just a statement of fact. He didn't wait for her thanks, didn't wait for anything. He simply walked toward the exit, his bodyguard falling into step behind him. And he expected her to follow. The night air hit Liana's face like a slap. She stood in the alley behind a clips, still clutching her heels in one hand, her bare feet against rough asphalt. The humidity wrapped around her like a second skin, thick and suffocating. Her heart was only now beginning to slow, the adrenaline starting to ebb and leave exhaustion in its wake. A sleek black sedan idled a few feet away, engine purring softly. The driver's door opened and a young woman stepped out. She was sharp-featured, maybe late 20s, with her hair pulled back into a tight ponytail. Her eyes swept the alley with practiced efficiency, and Liana caught the telltale bulge of a concealed weapon beneath her fitted blazer. Isla, the woman said by way of introduction, opening the rear passenger door. Her tone was professional, clipped. Get in. Liana turned, searching for Jiho. She wanted to thank him, needed to, even if the words felt inadequate for what he'd just done. But he was already walking away. His phone was pressed to his ear, his voice low and rapid as he spoke in Korean. His bodyguard flanked him, and neither of them looked back, not once. The dismissal stung more than it should. Liana stood there for a beat too long, feeling foolish. Of course he didn't care. She was a problem he'd solved, a disruption he'd handled, nothing more. She climbed into the car. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly expensive, cologne maybe. Liana sank into the seat, her body finally registering how badly she was shaking. Isla slid behind the wheel without a word and pulled out of the alley smoothly, merging into Charleston's late-night traffic. They drove in silence. Liana watched the city roll past, Neon signs, late-night diners, clusters of people stumbling out of bars. Normal life, the kind she'd been living just 2 hours ago. Isla pulled up outside a modest apartment complex on the east side of Charleston, Liana's building. She hadn't given an address. How did you... Out, Isla said, not unkindly. Liana stepped onto the curb, her legs still unsteady. Before she could close the door, Isla leaned across the seat and held out a small white card. No name, no logo, just a single phone number printed in black ink. If they come for you again, Isla said, her eyes locking onto Liana's, call that number. Before Liana could ask who they were or who would answer, the car door shut and Isla pulled away, taillights disappearing into the night. Liana stood there for a moment, staring at the card in her hand. Then she climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, unlocked the door, and collapsed onto her couch. The adrenaline crash hit her all at once, her hands shaking, her breath uneven, her mind replaying everything in sharp, disjointed flashes. Voss's eyes on the monitor, Jiho's hands on her waist, the cold authority in his voice. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. Her fingers moved almost on autopilot, typing everything she could remember. Names, dates, the Riverside dump site, the Korean crew Clerk had mentioned, the coroner they claimed to own. She had to document it, all of it, in case. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Liana's stomach dropped. She opened the message. Delete everything. Forget what you heard. This is your only warning. Her blood ran cold. They'd tracked her phone. They knew where she was, what she was doing. She wasn't safe. Not even close. Liana didn't sleep. She spent the entire night on her couch, staring at the text message, jumping at every sound outside her window. By the time dawn broke through her blinds, she'd made her decision. Go to the police. It was the only move that made sense. Clerk might own a coroner, might have dirty cops in his pocket, but he couldn't own everyone. There had to be someone clean, someone who'd listen. She showered quickly, scrubbing away the sweat and fear from the night before. She braided her hair into a tight crown, dressed in jeans and a simple cream blouse, something that made her look credible, trustworthy, the kind of woman the police would take seriously. She slipped Isla's card into her pocket, grabbed her keys, and left. The Charleston Police Precinct was a 15-minute walk from her apartment. The morning air was already humid, the city waking up around her. She kept her head down, moving with purpose. She made it 3 blocks before she noticed the black SUV. It was trailing her, slow, deliberate, keeping just enough distance to pretend it wasn't following. Liana's stomach dropped. She sped up, crossing the street mid-block. The SUV turned, matched her pace. Panic clawed at her chest, sharp and breathless. She glanced around. Early morning traffic, a handful of pedestrians, but no crowds, no safety in numbers. She cut left into an alley, her shoes slapping against wet pavement. Maybe she could lose them, double back, find somewhere public. But when she reached the middle of the alley, her blood turned to ice. The SUV screeched to a stop, blocking the far end, and from the entrance behind her, 3 figures stepped into view. Voss and 2 of his enforcers. She was cornered. Voss smiled, cold, predatory, like a man who'd been looking forward to this moment. You should have taken the warning, Liana. He moved toward her slowly, savoring every second of her fear. His enforcers flanked him, their expressions blank and professional. This wasn't personal for them, just business. Liana backed against the brick wall, her mind racing. There was nowhere to run, no way out. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around Isla's card. Voss was 10 feet away now. 5. Clerk doesn't like loose ends, he said casually, and you, sweetheart, are about as loose as they come. Then, from the alley entrance behind Voss came the low purr of an engine. A sleek black sedan pulled in, smooth and silent as a shadow. The door opened. Jiho stepped out. Isla emerged from the driver's side, flanked by two other members of his security team, both broad-shouldered, both radiating the kind of controlled violence that didn't need to announce itself. Jiho's expression was unreadable, calm, but his presence alone shifted the entire dynamic of the alley. Voss stopped mid-step. Jiho's eyes flicked to Liana, just for a second, a flash of recognition, before settling on Voss. When he spoke, his voice was calm, quiet, laced with something far more dangerous than anger. "You're in my way." Voss's confidence wavered, his jaw tightened. He recognized Jiho. Everyone in this world did. One of Jiho's men stepped forward, his hand resting casually under the bulge beneath his jacket. The message was clear. Voss cursed under his breath, his eyes darting between Jiho and his team. He was outgunned, outmatched, and he knew it. He took a step back, then another. But before he retreated fully, he locked eyes with Liana one last time. This isn't over. Then he turned and disappeared down the alley, his enforcers trailing behind him like dogs called to heel. Liana's knees nearly buckled as Voss's SUV disappeared around the corner. She pressed her palm against the brick wall, trying to steady herself, trying to breathe. Her entire body was shaking, not just her hands anymore, but everything. Jiho approached her with measured steps, his gaze sharp and assessing. He didn't rush, didn't offer comfort. He just watched her like he was cataloging every reaction, every tell. "Get in the car." It wasn't a suggestion. Liana hesitated. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, from Voss, from Clerk, from this man who'd moved through violence like it was second nature. But desperation was louder than instinct. Isla opened the rear door, her expression neutral, but her posture ready, waiting. Jiho's voice cut through Liana's spiraling thoughts, clipped and final. "We don't have time for debate." Liana climbed in. The interior was exactly as she remembered. Leather, expensive cologne, but kind of quiet that felt heavy. Jiho slid in across from her, his posture controlled, his hands resting on his knees. The door shut with a soft click, sealing them in. Isla pulled away from the alley smoothly, navigating Charleston's morning traffic without a word. Silence hung in the air between them, thick, uncomfortable. Jiho didn't break it immediately. He just studied her, the way her hands twisted in her lap, the way her breath came too fast, the way she couldn't quite meet his eyes. Finally, he spoke. "Why were they hunting you?" Liana's throat tightened. She'd spent all night rehearsing what she'd say to the police, but sitting here, across from this man who'd saved her twice now, the words felt different, heavier. She told him everything. The whiskey delivery, the cracked office door, the conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Clerk's voice, cold and confident, discussing the body that wouldn't surface. The coroner they owned. The directive to make sure the Korean crew didn't start digging. Jiho's expression didn't change as she spoke. He didn't interrupt, didn't react. But when she mentioned the Korean crew, something flickered in his eyes, brief, almost imperceptible. "What exactly did they say about us?" Liana recounted it word for word. She'd memorized every fragment, every detail, like her life depended on it, because it did. Jiho's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, swiped through it with controlled precision, then turned the screen toward her. The photo showed a young Korean man, late 20s, maybe early 30s. He had kind eyes and a bright smile, the kind that suggested he laughed easily. He was dressed casually, standing in front of what looked like a harbor. "Do you recognize him?" Liana shook her head. "No, I've never seen him before." Jiho's voice dropped. Cold, final. "His name was Min Jun. He was my second in command. He's been missing for 8 days. Liana's breath caught. The murder, the body, the cover-up Clerk had been orchestrating. It was Jiho's man. The realization slammed into her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was personal. Blood personal. Jiho leaned forward, closing the distance between them, his gaze boring into hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "You're going to tell me everything you know, and then you're going to help me bury the man who killed my brother." The safe house was a renovated loft in Charleston's Arts District. Exposed brick walls, high ceilings with industrial beams, and enough surveillance equipment to run a small intelligence operation. Monitors lined one wall, displaying feeds from cameras Liana couldn't even begin to count. A sleek desk held multiple laptops, encrypted phones, and equipment she didn't recognize. The space was clean, minimalistic, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Isla showed Liana to a guest room tucked in the back corner. It was simple: a bed with crisp white linens, a dresser, a small bathroom. Functional. Nothing more. "Stay here," Isla said. "Don't leave without clearance." Then she was gone. Liana sat on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning in circles she couldn't escape. She was in a MAFIA safe house with a man who controlled more power in one phone call than she'd ever held in her entire life. She should be terrified. And yet, she was alive. Jiho returned an hour later, holding a tablet. He didn't knock, just entered like he owned the space, because he did. He pulled out the chair at the small table near the window and sat, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Come here." Liana stood and crossed the room, sitting across from him. Jiho placed the tablet between them and pulled up a series of files: surveillance footage, financial records, communications logs. Everything was time-stamped, cross-referenced, meticulously organized. "Start talking," he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. "Names, locations, anything you remember." Liana did. She was surprised by how much she'd retained. The city official's name, Councilman Burke, the mention of a riverside dump site near the old industrial zone, the timeline clerk had referenced, 8 days since the body was moved, the coroner they claimed to own. Jiho listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. He asked precise questions, cutting through her rambling to pull out the details that mattered. He typed notes as she spoke, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. As they worked, something shifted. Jiho's coldness began to crack. Not much, just enough for Liana to notice the way his jaw tightened when she mentioned Minjin's name, the way his hand gripped his pen a little too hard when she recalled a detail about the Korean crew being close to finding something. When she mentioned the Riverside site again, specifically the eastern docks near the abandoned warehouses, Jiho stopped typing. His hand tightened around the pen until his knuckles went white. "That's where we lost contact with him," he said quietly. 8 days ago." Liana's chest tightened. She asked quietly, almost afraid to break the fragile moment between them. "Why did you help me, last night and again this morning?" Jiho didn't answer immediately. He set the pen down, his eyes fixed on the tablet screen, but she could tell he wasn't really looking at it anymore. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost uncertain. "I don't know." The honesty in those 3 words unsettled her more than anything else he could have said. That night, Liana couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day in her mind. Eventually, she gave up. She slipped out of the guest room and padded quietly into the main space. Jiho stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the glow of the city lights. He was still dressed, his suit jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He didn't turn when she approached, but she knew he'd heard her. He spoke without looking at her. "You should hate me. My world. What I do." Liana stopped a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself. "Maybe," she said softly, "but you saved my life twice." The silence that followed felt heavier than words. 3 days passed. Liana and Jiho fell into a rhythm. Mornings spent analyzing Clerk's operation, cross-referencing financial records with surveillance footage, mapping out his network of dirty officials and enforcers. Evenings were spent in tense, careful silence, each of them retreating to opposite corners of the loft like boxers between rounds. But something was shifting. Isla taught Liana basic self-defense in the afternoons, how to break a grip, how to use her body weight as leverage, where to strike if someone got too close. Liana's muscles ached from the training, but she welcomed the pain. It made her feel less helpless. Jiho's tech specialist, a quiet man named Tobias with wire-rimmed glasses and nervous hands, set up encrypted communication for her. A clean phone, secure apps, ways to reach Jiho's people if things went sideways. Slowly, Liana stopped feeling like a victim. She started feeling like a participant. One evening, she emerged from the guest room to find Jiho in the kitchen, cooking. It was an unexpected sight, this man who commanded fear and respect with a single glance, standing at the stove with his sleeves rolled up, moving through the space with the same precision he applied to everything else. He didn't acknowledge her presence, just plated japchae and grilled mackerel without ceremony, set both dishes on the small dining table, and gestured for her to sit. "You need to eat." It was the closest thing to kindness he'd offered since she'd arrived. Liana sat. The food smelled incredible, savory, rich, with hints of sesame and garlic. She picked up her chopsticks and took a bite. It was perfect. They ate in silence for a while, then Liana set down her chopsticks and asked the question that had been circling her mind for days. "Tell me about Minjun." Jiho's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse, shut down the way he always did when things got too personal. But then his mask slipped. "He followed me from Atlanta," Jiho said quietly, his eyes fixed on his plate. 3 years ago. He was young, idealistic. He believed in loyalty over profit, in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. His voice softened just slightly. "He was the best of us, and Clerk killed him to send a message, to prove he could touch my people and get away with it." Liana's chest tightened. She could hear the grief beneath his words, buried under layers of control and rage. Without thinking, she reached across the table and rested her hand over Jiho's. He froze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The contact felt electric, dangerous, like crossing a line neither had permission to cross. Then, slowly, Jiho turned his hand over, his fingers curled around hers, careful, deliberate, like he was testing the weight of something fragile. It lasted barely 5 seconds, but it shifted something fundamental between them. Jiho pulled his hand back first, his expression unreadable once more. He stood, cleared the plates without a word, and disappeared into the command center. Liana sat alone at the table, staring at her hand. That night, she lay awake in the guest room, her hand still tingling from his touch. She pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heartbeat, too fast, too loud. In the next room, Jiho sat in the dark, his phone glowing in his hand. On the screen was the last text Minjun had sent him 8 days before he disappeared. "I'll handle it, Jiho. Trust me." Jiho closed his eyes. Trust got Minjun killed, and now he was trusting a woman he barely knew. Jiho's intelligence confirmed it by mid-afternoon. Clerk was moving something big, a shipment tied to his underground finance network through a warehouse on the outskirts of Charleston, tonight. The timing was too convenient to ignore. Jiho decided to conduct surveillance personally. Isla objected immediately. "You don't go into the field for recon, that's what we're here for." But Jiho's mind was made up, and against every piece of tactical advice Isla offered, he made another decision. He brought Liana. "You know his operation better than anyone," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I need your eyes." They parked half a mile out, tucked behind an abandoned trucking depot. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its perimeter lit by harsh floodlights that carved shadows into the surrounding darkness. Jiho moved with silent precision and Leanna followed, her steps careful, her breathing controlled. Isla had taught her well. They approached on foot using the cover of darkness and the maze of shipping containers that littered the industrial yard. The air smelled like rust and motor oil. Crouched behind a stack of containers, Leanna watched as clerks' men loaded unmarked crates into waiting trucks. There were at least a dozen of them, enforcers she recognized from Eclipse, plus others she didn't. Jiho photographed everything. His movements were silent, controlled, professional. He didn't hesitate, didn't second guess. She was struck by how comfortable he was in this world, the danger, the shadows, the constant threat of violence. This was where he belonged. One of Clark's guards turned suddenly, his head snapping toward their position. He'd seen something, heard something. Flashlights swept in their direction, cutting through the dark like blades. Jiho grabbed Liana's hand and pulled her deeper into the container yard. They moved fast, staying low, weaving between the rusted metal walls. Her heart hammered in her chest, adrenaline flooding her system. They pressed against a cold metal wall, tucked into a narrow gap between two containers. Jiho's body shielded hers, his chest rising and falling against her back. His breath was warm against her temple. The guard's footsteps grew closer. The beam of his flashlight swept across the ground just feet from where they stood. Liana held her breath. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give them away. Jiho's hand moved from her wrist to her waist, steadying her, grounding her. His grip was firm, deliberate, like he was anchoring her to the moment. The guard paused, listened. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he moved on. When the danger passed, neither of them moved immediately. Jiho's forehead rested briefly against hers, and she could feel the tension radiating from him, not fear, but something else entirely, something raw and unguarded. His voice was barely a whisper. "You okay?" Liana nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They made it back to the car in silence. Jiho didn't let go of her hand until he opened the passenger door. Even then, his fingers lingered for just a second longer than necessary before he released her. As he drove, the city lights blurring past the windows, Liana stared out at the darkness and realized something terrifying. She wasn't just in his world now. She was starting to belong there. Back at the safe house, Jiho downloaded the surveillance photos onto his main system. What they revealed was worse than expected. Clark wasn't just covering up Minjun's murder. The shipment they'd photographed, the unmarked crates, the coded manifests, it was all tied to a trafficking operation. People, resources, money moving through channels that Jiho's organization had been trying to dismantle for years. And Clark had been siphoning from it, skimming profits, redirecting routes, playing both sides. Jiho's fury was quiet but absolute. He made calls, to Atlanta, to contacts in other cities, his voice low and controlled as he spoke in rapid Korean. Plans began to take shape. Tobias pulled up financial records, cross-referencing shell companies and wire transfers. Ela coordinated with operatives on the ground. Liana watched him work, seeing for the first time the full scope of his power. This wasn't just a man with money and influence. This was a strategist, a commander, someone who moved entire operations with a single phone call. It should have frightened her, but it didn't. Late that night, Liana couldn't sleep again. She wandered through the loft and found the staircase leading to the rooftop terrace, a space she hadn't known existed until now. Jiho stood at the railing, his silhouette outlined against the glow of Charleston's skyline. The city sprawled below them, lights flickering like stars scattered across the earth. She joined him without asking. For a long time they didn't speak. The night air was warm, humid, carrying the faint scent of the harbor. Finally, Liana said softly, You carry a lot. Jiho's laugh was bitter, humorless. It's the only thing I know how to do. She turned to face him, studying his profile, the sharp line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the weight he carried like armor. You don't have to carry it alone. Jiho looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his carefully constructed armor fractured. He reached out slowly, his fingers brushing her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. His voice was rough when he spoke. You should go. When this is over. He paused, his thumb grazing her bottom lip. Back to Atlanta, away from me. Liana didn't move, didn't flinch. Her eyes held his, steady and unwavering. What if I don't want to? The words hung between them, dangerous and raw. Jiho's breath hitched. She saw the war playing out behind his eyes, control versus desire, logic versus something he couldn't name. Then he closed the distance. His hand slid to the back of her neck, his fingers threading through her braids. He hesitated, just for a breath, giving her the chance to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it was slow, deliberate, devastating. The kiss deepened, and Liana felt herself melt into him, her hands finding the front of his shirt, gripping the fabric like an anchor. His other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer, eliminating the space between them. For the first time in years, Jiho allowed himself to feel something other than control. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, their foreheads resting together, he whispered against her lips, "This complicates everything." Liana smiled, her breath mingling with his. I know. His hand tightened in her hair, and he kissed her again, deeper this time, more certain. The city lights blurred around them, the world narrowing to just this moment, this connection, this choice they were both making. When they finally broke apart, Jiho's eyes searched hers, looking for doubt, for hesitation. He found neither. Armed with evidence, recordings, financial records, witness testimony, Jiho orchestrated a trap. It took 2 days to set up. Tobias fabricated communications through a compromised contact in Clark's network, someone who'd been feeding information to Jiho for weeks. The bait was simple, a lucrative deal involving the trafficking routes Clark had been skimming from. A meeting, same warehouse, tomorrow night. Too good to refuse. Clark took it. The night air was thick with humidity as Jiho's team moved into position around the warehouse perimeter. Liana sat in a secure vehicle half a block away, Isla behind the wheel, engine running. Her testimony had been recorded, every detail she remembered, every name, every location, and it was ready to be delivered to federal contacts Jiho had carefully vetted over the years. Clean agents. Ones who couldn't be bought. Through the tinted windows, Liana watched the warehouse entrance. Clark arrived exactly on time, his black SUV pulling up with Voss in the passenger seat and a small crew in the vehicle behind them. 4 men total. Not enough if things went sideways, but enough to look legitimate. They stepped out, Clark straightening his suit jacket with the same polished confidence he always carried. He walked into the warehouse expecting a negotiation. Instead, he found Jiho waiting in the center of the empty space, flanked by 6 of his people. The overhead lights cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The loading bay doors at both ends were closed, sealed, surrounded. Clark stopped mid-step, his eyes sweeping the room, his jaw tightened as the reality of the situation clicked into place. He'd been outmaneuvered. Jiho's voice cut through the silence like a blade, cold, precise. You killed my brother. You thought you could hide behind dirty cops and politicians. Clark's expression hardened. He tried to recover, falling back on the arrogance that had protected him for years. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends, people who'll bury you if anything happens to me. Jiho didn't blink. Your friends are already talking, saving themselves. Clark's confidence wavered. He glanced at Voss, who shifted his weight, hand inching toward his jacket. Don't. Isla's voice crackled over Jiho's earpiece. But Voss moved anyway. He pulled a weapon, a desperate, reckless play. Jiho's team responded instantly. 3 red laser dots appeared on Voss's chest before he could even raise the barrel. He froze, his breathing ragged, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from realizing you've made a fatal mistake. "Drop it," one of Jiho's men ordered. Voss hesitated, then the gun clattered to the floor. Jiho stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of Clerk, pulling a small recording device from his pocket. He pressed play. Clerk's own voice filled the warehouse. Clear, damning. "The body won't surface. We own the coroner. Make sure the Koreans' people don't start digging." Clerk's face went ashen. Jiho's voice was quiet, lethal. "I could end you right here, but I won't." He signaled to Isla, who appeared from the side entrance, flanked by 2 federal agents in plain clothes. Jiho had vetted them personally, agents who couldn't be bought, who had their own reasons for wanting Clerk behind bars. "They will." The agents moved forward, reading Clerk his rights as they cuffed him. Voss and his crew were secured next, all of them subdued and silent. Clerk struggled, his composure finally shattering. "You're making a mistake, Kang. You don't know what you've started." Jiho didn't respond. He simply watched as they dragged Clerk toward the waiting federal vehicle, his threats echoing uselessly in the empty warehouse. When the space finally emptied, Jiho walked back to the vehicle where Liana waited. She stepped out as he approached, her heart pounding as she searched his face. For the first time since this began, she saw exhaustion in his eyes, real, unguarded. "It's over," he said quietly. Liana nodded, relief flooding through her. But they both knew the real question remained. What happens now? 2 weeks later, Liana stood in her apartment, the one she thought she'd never see again. The same worn couch, the same chipped coffee table, the same view of Charleston's east side through windows that needed cleaning. Clerk was awaiting trial. His network had been dismantled piece by piece. Councilman Burke had resigned in disgrace. The coroner who'd helped cover up Min Jun's murder was cooperating with federal investigators to save himself. She was free, safe. And yet the space felt empty. Jiho had kept his distance after that night at the warehouse. He'd made sure she was protected, assigned security she never saw but knew was there, made sure her testimony was airtight, that the federal prosecutors had everything they needed, made sure she could return to her life. But he didn't come himself. Liana told herself it was better this way, cleaner. He'd said it himself on that rooftop. She should go back to Atlanta, away from him, away from his world. So she was doing exactly that. She'd reapplied to the nursing program at Emory, got accepted, found a small studio apartment near campus. It was time for a fresh start, time to become the person she'd been trying to be before Eclipse, before Clerk, before everything fell apart. She was packing when the knock came. Liana froze, her hands still gripping the sweater she'd been folding. She wasn't expecting anyone. Security would have called up. She crossed to the door and opened it. Jiho stood in the hallway, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He wore a simple black shirt and dark jeans, no suit, no armor, just him. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. Leona nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "You told me to." Jiho stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. The space felt smaller with him in it, more charged. "I was wrong." The words cost him something. She could see it in the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened, the vulnerability he was forcing himself to show. He crossed the room, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice low and rough. "I don't know how to be soft, but I know that letting you walk away is the worst mistake I could make." Liana's breath caught. Her heart hammered in her chest as he stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I spent 2 weeks telling myself you'd be safer without me, Jiho continued, that you deserved a normal life, someone who could give you peace. He paused, his eyes searching hers. But I can't let you go. Liana reached out slowly, taking his hand and threading her fingers through his. Then don't let me. Something in Jiho's expression broke. Relief? Hope? Something raw and unguarded. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, his arms wrapping around her waist like he was afraid she might disappear. I can't promise you easy, he whispered. I don't want easy, Liana whispered back. I want you. The kiss that followed was slower this time, less desperate, more certain. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Jiho spoke against her lips. Atlanta or Charleston? Liana smiled, her hand sliding up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. Wherever you are. Jiho kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms tightening around her. The half-packed boxes forgotten. The nursing program could wait. Atlanta could wait. This, right here, right now, was exactly where she needed to be. The end. Thank you for watching K-Stories by Emma. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more Afro-Korean romance tales. Drop a comment below telling me what you thought of Liana and Jiho's journey. Until next time, keep believing in love that breaks all the rules.